Today, Sylvie and I are at the Imperial War Museum at Duxford in Cambridgeshire, and we're starting with a tour around the British section, which is situated inside this large complex here. As you enter the building, one of the first planes you see is this magnificent Handley Page Victor. Now, the Handley Page Victor entered service in 1958 as part of the V Bomber Force, but it retired as a nuclear bomber in 1968, with many of them being converted into tankers for in-flight refuelling operations, and they eventually retired in 1993. And out of 86 that were built, only 4 survive, and this is one of them. As you enter the main exhibition area, one of the first aircraft that you actually notice is this massive short Sunderland flying boat, which seems to dominate the entire exhibition. Now, the flying boats first flew in 1937 and were widely used as patrol and reconnaissance aircraft to counter the U-boat threat during World War II. They last flew with the RAF in 1959. Although the Royal New Zealand Air Force were still using them apparently up until 1967. Almost 750 of these planes were built in total, but it's believed that there is only one remaining in the world still in flying condition. Beside the flying boat is this Avro Lancaster bomber, along with an array of some of the ordnance that they used to drop during World War II, including an example of the famous bouncing bomb. Only 2 of these aircraft remain in flying condition in the world, one here in the UK and one in Canada, although I believe that there is a 3rd example being restored to flying condition somewhere in the UK. One of the exhibits here at Duxford is the fuselage section of a Handley Page Hermes passenger plane, which is accessible for visitors to walk through. The Handley Page Hermes first entered service with BOAC in 1950, taking over from the Avro York aircraft, flying services across the African continent and other places. I can actually recall flying in a plane like this from London to Singapore back in the mid-1960s, and it took a gruelling 3 days to get there, making several stops along the way in the Middle East, in the Maldives and in Ceylon. And here's something you won't see on a modern passenger plane: a ladies' powder room. Also here at Duxford is one of the only two remaining examples of the TSR-2 Tactical Strike and Reconnaissance aircraft, a project which began in the 50s but was cancelled in the 1960s due to escalating costs. Next on the list is the Avro York, which was derived from the Lancaster bomber as a transport aircraft during World War II. They were used both in military and civilian roles between 1943 and 1964, and the aircraft here at Duxford was one of the many that actually took part in the Berlin airlift during 1948 and 49. And then we come to the Vulcan bomber, and this is one of my all-time favourites, especially at air shows, and I think everyone's disappointed that they're no longer flying. And then we have the English Electric Lightning, which used to be one of the fastest fighter jets on the planet in its day. And I remember these things flying when I lived in Singapore in the 60s, and the sonic booms that were constantly reverberating over the island. Lovely planes. And now we have the Panavia Tornado, also known as the multi-role combat aircraft. These first flew in 1974 and eventually entered service in 1979, and they were operated by Germany, Italy, Saudi Arabia and of course the Royal Air Force. And these always used to be regulars at air shows here at Duxford, and they were eventually retired in 2019. Which is sad really, great aeroplanes. And this is the Westland Wessex helicopter. This is a Royal Naval version, and I'm very familiar with these. I served in the Royal Navy back in the 1970s, and we had one of these on our ship. I actually flew in one a couple of times. And this is the great favourite here at Duxford. This is the Concorde, and you can actually walk through this one, but because we've got a lot of school kids here today, I'm actually going to come back to this later in the afternoon, and what I'll do is I'm going to post that as a separate video. Well, that pretty much concludes the British section, so we're going to walk down the airfield now, and then we're going to take a tour around the American section. Well, we've come to the American section, and one of the first planes that you actually see is this magnificent Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird, and this is one of the most impressive planes here in the display, and without question it was the fastest plane on the planet when it was in operation, and I think they all went out of service back in the mid 1990s, and sad to say I never got to see one flying. And right here we have the B-29 Super Fortress, and the Duxford Museum actually acquired this one around 1980. And right next to that we have a B-17G Flying Fortress, which Duxford Museum acquired in 1978. And Duxford does have a flying example of a B-17, which has dual names. It's got Memphis Belle on one side and Sally B on the other, and it's flown regularly, not just here at Duxford, but it takes off and flies off to air shows all around the country throughout the year. And this is the plane that I have seen flying quite often. This is the McDonnell Douglas F4 Phantom, and they were operated by quite a few air forces, but we also had them in the Royal Navy back in the 70s. and I used to see them flying quite often off the decks of the old Ark Royal. And they often used to come here and fly at air shows here at Duxford back in the 1980s. And this is the Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter, also known as the Huey. And no Vietnam War movie's complete without these things. And amazingly enough, despite the fact they've been flying since the 50s, there's still a lot of them flying. But the entire exhibition here in the American section is dominated by this absolutely enormous B-52 Stratofortress. And this one arrived at Duxford in 1983 when the runway was a lot longer. It was cut short when they built the M11. And this entire building was actually designed with the B-52 in mind. It had to be big enough to accommodate this massive plane with its near 200-foot wingspan, and then fit all the other planes in around it. And it's not until you actually walk along underneath this plane you get some idea of its size. And the only way I can describe it, it's like a giant nuclear submarine with wings. Well, now we're going to take a walk up this walkway, which goes all the way round the building and gives you an elevated view of all the aircraft on display. Well, that pretty much wraps up our tour of the American section. We're heading back to the British section now, where hopefully all them school kids will have gone home. So I can do a walkthrough on the Concorde with very little disturbance. And that's in my next video, so I'll catch you then.